Welcome. This is Dr. Michio Kaku, Professor of Theoretical Physics at the City College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and this is Exploration. Every week in Exploration, we discuss the fascinating world of science and its impact on society. And today, we have a special edition of Exploration because my colleague, Stephen Hawking, has passed away. And also, I should say that one of his chief missions was to establish a presence for humanity in outer space. And that is precisely the theme of my new book, The Future of Humanity, which just hit the New York Times bestseller list. But first, let me say a few things about my colleague, Stephen Hawking. If you take a look at the pantheon of great scientists and physicists who have ever walked the surface of the Earth, you realize that Dr. Stephen Hawking is way up there. He's a towering figure in science. Not since Einstein have we had a scientist like Hawking who could, on one hand, probe some of the deepest secrets of space and time, but on the other hand, thrill and educate literally millions of people about the mystery, the majesty of the night sky. If you've ever gone outside at night and just looked up and see the splendor of billions and billions of stars staring down on you, then you begin to wonder about these cosmic questions. Who am I? Where did it all come from? What is the role, if any, that humanity plays in this great tapestry called the universe? These are the kinds of questions that all of us have simply looking at the night sky. Now, you'd never know that the young Stephen Hawking would eventually make history because he was a very ordinary student when he was a child. He was indifferent. He learned physics. He was brilliant. That was obvious, but he just didn't seem to care that much. His life was rather aimless until he hit the age of 21. And then all hell broke loose. He began to stumble. He began to feel numbness. Something was wrong with his nervous system. And when he went to the doctors, they basically gave him a death warrant. You have ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, an irreversible, incurable disease which will eventually lead to total paralysis and death within just a few years. Well, as you can imagine, the young Stephen Hawking was very depressed upon getting this death warrant. But he said to himself, after a long period of depression, well, it's time to end being sorry for yourself. Why not do something in the short amount of time that you have left? Why not, therefore, tackle some of the biggest questions in all of physics? Well, the biggest question of all was Einstein's unfinished dream of a theory of everything. You see, in some sense, well, you can say that God has a left hand and a right hand. The left hand is the quantum theory, this mysterious theory of the atom, where everything's uncertain, where particles can somehow jump out of the vacuum, out of nothingness. And then you have the right hand of God, which is relativity, the theory of the Big Bang, the theory of black holes, the theory of the universe in the large. Now, the problem is, the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand. Atomic physics seems to have nothing to do with gravity. So why is that? Why should they have two different mathematics, two different languages, and two different fundamental principles when they are part of the same universe? That was the question that Einstein laid out and spent 30 years of his life chasing after. A theory that he thought would allow us to, quote, read the mind of God. Well, to Hawking, this was a challenge. So he started to apply quantum mechanics to black holes. Now, black holes are the remnant of giant dead stars. We see them now, thousands of them, lurking in the center of galaxies. For example, in our own backyard, we have a black hole. Go out tonight. Look in the direction of Sagittarius. Cell phones today, you can download an app which allows you to locate any constellation in the night sky. Amazing. A planetarium in your cell phone. Well, when you do that, go to Sagittarius, specifically Sagittarius A. By rights, there should be a fireball in Sagittarius. a fireball that even outshines the moon as the brightest object in the night sky. A huge fireball that comes out every night, which should dazzle us, but doesn't. That's where the black hole lurks, in the middle of Sagittarius A. Well, what happened? What happened is the Milky Way galaxy is quite dusty. In fact, that's where we come from. Thank goodness it's dusty, or else we wouldn't be here. We are made out of galactic dust. But because the plane of the galaxy is so dusty, when we look at the galactic center, we see blackness. We don't see hardly anything at all. That's why for so many centuries, people ignored Sagittarius and Sagittarius A, because there was literally nothing there of interest. Well, now we know that's the center of the galaxy, and at the center there lurks a gigantic black hole. It weighs 2 to 3 million times the mass of our own sun. It is gigantic. It is huge. It is mysterious. And the question that Hawking asked himself is, what is the eventual fate of the black hole? Now, we all know the black holes are black. That's because the gravity is so intense that even light itself cannot escape its clutches. Therefore, the black hole should be black. But you see, then Hawking realized something strange. The quantum theory, the theory that he tries to unite gravity with, says that everything's uncertain. Even blackness is uncertain. So how are we so sure that the black hole is black when the uncertainty principle says, no, there's got to be uncertainty there? In other words, black holes must be gray. They must gently seep out radiation. Now, this idea was preposterous. If a black hole's gravity is so intense, how can it possibly miss something and allow radiation to seep outside? Well, quantum mechanics says that even nothingness is chock full of activity. Particles and antiparticles are jumping in and out of existence. We don't see them because they're very faint and they only last for a fraction of a second before they disappear back into the vacuum. But then Hawking said to himself, if a black hole's energy is so great that maybe some of these virtual particles don't simply disappear back in the vacuum, but escape, causing the black hole to radiate Hawking radiation. And that was the insight that he made. The first application of quantum mechanics, that is atomic physics, to black holes was Hawking radiation. Now you may say to yourself, well, why didn't Hawking win the Nobel Prize in Physics? This is great stuff we're talking about, a first step toward a unified theory of everything. Well, the answer is very simple. The Nobel Prize Committee only gives Nobel Prizes to phenomena that are well established, well recorded, well experimented with, and when it comes to Hawking radiation, it's simply too faint to be analyzed by our feeble instruments on the planet Earth. However, you can talk to any physicist, and they'll say that Hawking radiation must exist. If it doesn't exist, then most of modern physics goes down the toilet. It must exist because quantum mechanics must also apply to black holes as well as electrons. Now, Hawking did this even though he was faced with ALS. The doctors gave him this death warrant when he was 21 years old. He would eventually become paralyzed. He wouldn't even be able to move a pencil. His career was essentially over. Now, a normal person at that point would give up. They'd be crushed. Just think about that. You're going to die this horrible death in just a few years, and you're totally paralyzed. Even the simplest bodily function you cannot take care of. So he decided to do something about it. He decided to rededicate his life to do something useful for a change. And he became a master of quantum mechanics as a consequence. So here was a man who faced adversity of the most stringent kind and said to himself, I'm not going to let adversity dominate over me. I'm going to dominate over my adversity. And that's exactly what he did. Now, years ago, back in the 1980s, I had a chance to visit Hawking's house in Cambridge. He invited me to give a talk, because that's the field that I work in, quantum gravity. So he invited me to give a talk in Cambridge at his conference. But afterwards, we had a chance to come and visit his house, and it was remarkable. There were all these instruments there, mechanical instruments that would allow him to function and do research. For example, you have to be able to open up a physics journal. There was a device that, well, you put the physics journal on it, you push a button, and it literally grabs a page and flips it over. So just by the push of a button, you can start to read physics journals. Because, of course, Hawking wanted to be at the forefront of modern physics. However, as the years went by, let's face it, things got worse and worse and worse. His condition sort of stabilized. He's already living much longer than the average person with ALS, but he's beginning to lose control of his body. First of all, graduate students. Graduate students would be trained to understand his garbled words and to print out complete sentences. I still remember the garbled sentences that he would make when he gave a speech to a large audience. Eventually, he lost control of his vocal cords. Very sad. But then an engineer created a voice synthesizer for him, which allowed him to speak using words that he could punch out with his fingers. Well, ever the clown, Stephen Hawking said that he loved the voice synthesizer except for the fact that it made him speak with an American accent. And he, of course, is a subject of the United Kingdom, not the United States. However, the voice synthesizer did allow him to communicate directly to the public. However, as time went by, he even lost control of his fingers. Then he would also try to blink. But eventually he would lose control over the blinking process, and he would then use twitches of his cheek. Anything to communicate with the outside world. And believe it or not, even faced with this adversity of near total paralysis, he was able to write bestsellers like The Brief History of Time that sold 10 million copies. In other words, Stephen Hawking was a rock star. Now think about that for a moment. How many rock stars do you know are paralyzed, cannot speak a word at all, and are professors of theoretical physics working in Einstein's theory? How many of them become rock stars? And then you begin to realize how improbable his life was. The fact that he was able to overcome such adversity and then make a mark, a historic mark in the annals of physics. Now, we should also point out that he was looking at string theory, which is the theory that I work on. I'm one of the co-founders of string field theory. But it's sad to say that because of his disability, he could not use a pen, and he could not do many of the calculations in string theory. However, he called for conferences in string theory. That's why he invited me to give one of the talks in Cambridge University. We should also point out that a Hollywood movie was made about his life, and it was called A Theory of Everything. So not only did he make an appearance in Star Trek, The Simpsons, and also Hollywood movies, he was churning out bestsellers that sold by the millions around the world. A remarkable achievement for someone who is paralyzed. However, we should point out that much more work has yet to be done on the theory of everything. That is a theory which combines gravity, the theory of Einstein, with atomic physics or quantum mechanics. More work has to be done. String theory is the leading theory, the leading candidate for a theory of everything, but it's very difficult to prove. That's why we're revving up the Large Hadron Collider, the largest atom smasher on the Earth, to try to probe the periphery of string theory. Hopefully the next generation of atom smashers, the next generation of detectors will in fact pick up evidence that there is a theory of everything out there, the dream that Einstein pursued for the last 30 years of his life. We should also point out that Stephen Hawking was not afraid of controversy. He was not afraid of making mistakes. If he made a mistake, he would just correct it immediately. I remember reading one of his papers, and in the first sentence of the paper, he basically says, "Disregard my previous paper. It's wrong. This paper is correct. I've corrected the problem." Now, how many scientists do you know come right out and say, "I was wrong on this one"? He was also wrong on the question of information. That is, if you take the Encyclopedia Britannica and you throw it into a black hole, is the information of the Britannica lost forever? Hawking said, yes, it is lost forever because nothing can escape the clutches of a black hole except Hawking radiation. However, I'm a quantum physicist, and most quantum physicists say no. Information cannot be lost at all. Even if you were to burn the Encyclopedia Britannica, information in the Britannica still goes into the air in the form of smoke, and you could somehow retrieve it if you have instruments that are delicate enough. We can't do that, of course, but in principle, it is possible to retrieve the information even in a burnt manuscript. And so the physics community thought that Hawking was wrong. Well, guess who was right? Hawking admitted that he was wrong. So let there be light. Let there be black holes in which information seeps out again. So where did the information of the Britannica go? When you throw the encyclopedia into a black hole, it re-emits Hawking radiation, and that's where the information is. It's there. It's there in the form of Hawking radiation. So Hawking was wrong. However, the key to the whole puzzle was Hawking radiation. So Hawking, in other words, had the last laugh. Now, I should also say that Stephen Hawking was interested in social problems concerning the fate of humanity itself. He was fearful that one day we would destroy ourselves, perhaps self-inflicted crises from global warming or germ warfare or nuclear proliferation, or perhaps Mother Nature could unleash her wrath. And he said we should go into outer space. We need an insurance policy. Now, no one is saying we should evacuate the Earth. That costs too much. Impractical. No one is saying that we should ignore global warming on the Earth. No. We're Earthlings. We have to solve Earth problems because we created them. We don't want to export our problems onto Mars. No, we want to clean up our own mess. So Stephen Hawking said, yes, ultimately our destiny will be in outer space. And in fact, that's the theme of my latest book, The Future of Humanity. All about the space program, terraforming Mars, all about the search for immortality as we explore the universe, and our life beyond the Earth. And I'm proud to say that because of you, the listeners, the book hit the New York Times bestseller list. So thank you so much for those of you who came to my book tour. However, I got a lot of comments. I got a lot of ideas and energy and enthusiasm talking to people there. So I'd like to answer some of the questions that were raised during the book tour. One question that I heard was, well, we went to the moon, and that was 50 years ago. What happened? And will the same thing happen all over again? Is it deja vu? What's the problem? Well, the problem there can be summarized in one word, cost, C-O-S-T. It turns out that in 1966, NASA's budget was 5% of the entire federal budget. Let me repeat that again. The budget for the moon program consumed 5% of the entire federal budget of the United States of America. That was intolerable. Now, we tolerated it briefly because, of course, the Cold War was on. We had to show that we're better than the Russians, and so people didn't mind. But once we went to the moon, people lost interest very quickly, and the whole thing collapsed. It was simply too expensive to maintain. So for 50 years, we've been pretty much spinning wheels. But then something has happened. Costs have dropped dramatically, opening up the heavens for private enterprise and even tourism. First of all, think of the movie The Martian, starring Matt Damon. How much did that movie cost? Well, it cost about $100 million, the cost of a typical big budget Hollywood movie. But the Indians sent a space probe to Mars for $70 million. In other words, going to Mars in a Hollywood movie is more expensive than actually going to Mars in a rocket ship. So during the Oscars, they should give an Oscar for the best supporting spacecraft. Amazing. Hollywood could bankroll a good part of the space program. Second of all, last month, Millions of people watched the launching of the Falcon Heavy from Cape Canaveral. Thousands lined up in the roads of Cape Canaveral to witness this event. What's the big deal? We see rockets taking off all the time. Why did the Falcon Heavy generate so much excitement? Because this was a moon rocket, fully capable of sending the Dragon space capsule all the way to the moon and back. This was no ordinary rocket. For the first time in 50 years, a rocket was launched from Cape Canaveral capable of reaching the moon. And then, of course, what's even more surprising is who paid for it. Believe it or not, who paid for it was Elon Musk, a private individual, a billionaire, bankrolled the whole operation himself. And now, not to be outdone, he wants an even bigger rocket, bigger than the Falcon Heavy, to go all the way to Mars, because that's his dream, to create a multi-planet species. Think about that for a moment. Now, the new rocket is called the BFR. B for big. We're talking about a very big rocket. R for rocket. And F for your imagination. So we're talking about a new era dawning in the exploration of outer space. This was initiated by former President Barack Obama. He allowed private enterprise to play a dominant role in the space program, and that's exactly what happened. Now, not to be outdone, now a billionaire behind Amazon, Jeff Bezos, he's jumped into the game, and we may even have a traffic jam around the moon. Who would have thought? NASA has the SLS booster rocket, very expensive, and it costs about $1 billion per launch, and it's paid for by you and me, the taxpayers. Then we have Elon Musk of Tesla Motors and SpaceX. He has the Falcon Heavy. He thinks he could bring down the cost by a factor of 10. And then we have the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos of Amazon. He says that, well, he's funded his own spaceport in Texas. He doesn't even have to go to Cape Canaveral. He can launch his own rockets from Texas. And he has his fleet of rockets, like the new Armstrong, which could, in principle, reach the moon. Not only that, the Chinese are jumping in the game. The Chinese have announced that they want to create a space station, just like ours, and then on to the moon. The Chinese flag will be placed on the moon. And after all this chaos, we're going to have a traffic jam over the moon. And space tourism is taking off. Richard Branson of Virgin Atlantic, he's put his billions and backed Virgin Galactic. The idea that space tourism will eventually be a profit-making venture. So what I'm trying to say is something very simple. It's a whole new ball game out there. Prices have dropped. Countries like China, India are now jumping into the game. Silicon Valley engineers, private individuals are now putting their money on the line. And they say, yes, we too want to go to the stars. And speaking about the stars, you realize that Stephen Hawking has convinced his band of billionaires to back the Breakthrough Starshot program. The idea of sending a postage stamp containing a chip and a parachute, blasting it with laser beams, and sending it to Alpha Centauri in just 20 years. This is amazing. The first Starship will not look like the Enterprise in Star Trek. The first Starship will look like a postage stamp. And we'll send hundreds of them, hoping that just a few of them actually whizzes by Proxima Centauri, the closest planet to the Earth, which is also very much Earth-like. So that's the first target, I think, of the space program. And then in my book, I go even farther than that. I go to Titan and Europa, moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Did you know that Titan has an atmosphere of methane gas? Methane gas is the stuff of rocket fuel. In other words, Titan, a moon of Saturn, could become the gas station of the solar system. Think about that. Things that we once knew but thought there was no practical application now become very practical once we think about exploring outer space. So Europa and Titan are very much on NASA's agenda. And then NASA has something called the 100-year Starship program, whereby we're going to literally go to the stars. This is amazing once again. And I have my own method of going to the stars, and that is at the speed of light. You know, the digital revolution is so advanced now that we can digitalize people. In other words, everything known about you, your credit card transactions, your Instagram, videotapes, YouTube favorites, all of that can be codified, digitized, and put on a CD. Everything known about you, so that in the future, when you go to the library and you check out a book about Winston Churchill, instead of reading the book, you'll talk to him. You'll talk to Winston Churchill. You'll talk to a reasonable facsimile that has all his memories, all his speeches, everything known about him in one computer program. Now, I wouldn't mind talking to Einstein. I would love an opportunity to talk to Einstein. If somebody were to digitize all his speeches, all his thinking, all his mathematics, I would love the opportunity to chat with Albert Einstein. This means that one day you might be digitized, and you'll talk to your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandaughter who wants to meet her great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. Think about that. Now, what do we do with this connectome? The connectome is the pathways of the brain. We'll have the complete map perhaps in this century. What are we going to do with it? One thing I suspect is we're going to shoot it on a laser beam into outer space. Information can be put on a laser beam. That's why we have GPS satellites, for example, and then shot around the world. You realize that once we put your digitized persona on a laser beam, we can send it to the moon. And on the moon, you'll be there in 1 second. 1 second, you're on the moon. No booster rockets, no need for messy weightlessness. Just 1 second, you're on the moon. 20 minutes, you're on Mars. Five or so hours, and you could whiz by Pluto. So we're talking about a whole new ball game. A whole new ball game where even starships are being looked at. And then, of course, people want to know, once we go to the stars, we bump into extraterrestrial life, what are they going to look like? What will they do to us if we meet them? And in my book, I say, well, yeah, a lot of people email me, and they say that, of course, aliens exist because I've been abducted. I've been abducted by the aliens. I've talked to them. I know they're out there. So what do I tell these people? I tell people that if you've ever been abducted by a flying saucer, for God's sake, steal something. I don't care what it is. An alien pen, an alien paperweight, an alien paperclip, anything. So you have bragging rights, anything so that you have reproducible, testable evidence that you have been visited by aliens from outer space. Well, unfortunately, that's it for exploration.